Hello and welcome. My name is Joshua Cole, and I'm very happy to see you all here for our graduate and undergraduate student presentations today. One of the very important things that we do, maybe in some ways one of the most important things that we do at the Center for European Studies, is support undergraduate and graduate students in their research efforts. And we offer quite a few different kinds of research support throughout the year. And we'd like to take advantage of this moment here to tell students who've come about some of these opportunities that are available for people to apply for this year. The application deadline on December 2nd this year is for the Jean Monnet Graduate Fellowship, which is a very important summer funding that we offer to graduate students who are working on the subject, and I emphasize here, broadly defined, of European integration. We accept applications in many different fields that aren't necessarily directly related to contemporary policy debates, but thinking about the process of European integration in its broadest historical as well as contemporary contexts. This is $5,000 to support 12 weeks of research and a stay abroad. In February, we have deadlines for 3 different grants, and I hope that people will inform themselves about these. First of all, there are the 2014 and 2015 academic year and the 2014 summer FLAS fellowships. These are foreign language area studies fellowships to support people in gaining the languages that they need for advanced research projects. There are also fellowships available administered through the Center for European Studies and the Center for Russian and Eastern European Studies for incoming graduate students, that is, for people who are applying for MA and PhD programs through the university. Among the most important is the Copernicus Fellowship for incoming graduate students in Polish studies. Again, that's a February 1st deadline. And this is to support graduate work leading towards the doctoral degree. There are also, from the Weiser Center, the Weiser Emerging Democracy Fellowships for graduate students, for people coming in to do a PhD on the theme of emerging democracies. These are, both the Copernicus and the Emerging Democracy Fellowships are quite generous. Usually they're offered in conjunction with departmental support as well. So what they effectively amount to is full support for a number of years as people work towards their doctoral degree. Again, those deadlines are on February 1st. The main event today, however, is our presentations from our students who have done successful research projects abroad. I'm going to introduce them one at a time. They'll give their brief presentation, so I'll be popping up and down like a yo-yo. But I think it's better that way. Our first speaker today is Maria Hadjipolycarpou, who is a PhD student in the Department of Comparative Literature, and she was the recipient last year of a Center for European Studies Jean Monnet Graduate Fellowship. The title of her project and her presentation today is The Aesthetic Path of Political Discourse, the Case of Archbishop Makarios III, and I'll let her describe in detail the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to say thank you to the Center for European Studies for providing me with the Jean Monnet Fellowship and giving me the opportunity to work on a project that I've been wanting to do for a long time. Today I will be talking about one of the most graphic and most ambivalent figures of the post-colonial Mediterranean world, the President of Cyprus and Archbishop Makarios. So many different works have been published about Makarios, from memoirs, biographies, works of literature, historical analysis of his national politics. The reason for those publications was precisely because of Makarios' multifaceted personality that was intriguing to those who knew him, as well as to those who saw the impact of his political aspirations combined with his spiritual aspirations. The idea that the post-colonial Mediterranean is haunted by the pre-colonial and pre-imperial past has been the overarching idea that holds the essence of my work to this point. And Makarios is a great example through which this idea is portrayed. Makarios had a particular view that politics and religion should remain inextricably linked, like at the time of the Byzantine Empire, for example. At the time of the Byzantine Empire, the Patriarch held both the position of the religious leader of Orthodoxy, as well as political and judicial responsibilities. Makarios saw himself as a modern patriarch, onto whom religious and civil authority coincided. On that prerogative, Makarios can be studied today as a post-colonial Mediterranean phenomenon, in the sense that he was haunted by the pre-colonial, specifically the Byzantine past that haunts the whole Mediterranean region today. Even though numerous opinions have been raised about his life and his political career, little attention has been paid to Makarios' own writings and public speeches. I am convinced, after reading the 18 huge volumes containing Makarios' speeches during this summer, that Makarios' political rhetoric holds the essence of the Cypriot national discourse, and his speeches are a great resource for those interested in studying those. Makarios' public speeches are marked by one overarching theme, which is his constant aspiration to bridge ideas of Christian faith and the nation state. This aspiration is substantiated by numerous quotations from the New Testament and references to spiritual fathers of Orthodox Christianity, such as John Chrysostom and the Apostles, that Makarios incorporated into his own political rhetoric. I would like to show you a short excerpt from one of Makarios' speeches that he gave in Athens in 1974 before I move on with my analysis. Sorry, I need to find the spot. Where is it exactly? Okay. So the rhetoric that he used in this particular speech is exemplary of Makarios' general political rhetoric, heavily characterized by metaphors, allegories, and allusions to Christian portraiture. In this speech, Makarios says that he comes holding an olive branch in his hand that he would like to offer to the Turkish Cypriot fellow citizens. The olive branch that Makarios offers was, and still is, the emblem of the Cypriot Republic. But most importantly, the olive branch, along with the dove bearing an olive branch on its beak, is a Christian symbol for peace. And we see depictions of that in Christian imagery of that period, of the Christian period. Makarios came to Athens as if out of a Christian imagery, as a Christian dove, to give the olive branch as a sign of friendship and reconciliation to the Turkish Cypriots. But Makarios went on to say that he refuses to concede land and water, symbols, as he said, of national sovereignty and power. He juxtaposed the olive branch to the land, the olive branch as a symbol of Christianity and the land as a symbol of nationalism. Makarios was striving to do what he had been doing from the beginning of his political career. He was striving to reconcile the Christian faith with the nation state. In the process of reenacting those forms of Byzantine tradition, his use of poetic language was crucial. For such an aspiration to reconcile the Christian faith with the nation, solely the words of political rhetoric will not be adequate. Makarios had to reconcile the literary with the political, the tradition religious and literary with realpolitik. In another speech he gave in the same year, he also portrayed his tendency towards creating a spiritual nation. He said, "The rise of Christianity and its ethical doctrines influenced the formation of the general principles of justice, for they had a universal validity and prestige." And later he added, "Among the accomplishments of the Hellenic Christian civilization was the Byzantine law, to the creation of which the principles of Christianity contributed." In 1960, when Makarios became the first president of the Cypriot state, he clearly stated his vision for the creation of a pious nation. He went on praising the self-sacrifice of the Cypriot people during the anti-colonial struggle, while calling them national martyrs. The name he chose for the general Cypriot population was equally Christian and pious. He called them the innately spiritual people of Cyprus. In addition to that, he urged for another set of sacrifices towards the creation of the nation-state, το Κυπριακό οικοδόμημα. As Makarios was praising the people, he was simultaneously ascribing to them spiritual characteristics. One telling example that speaks to his ambition to create and portray the Cypriot people as pious and spiritual, and in a way create a nation of saints, is his one and only publication of a book with the title The Island of Saints, or the Holy Island, in Greek, η Αγία Νήσος. In this book, he summarized the history of Cyprus from the perspective of hagiography. He gave a short portrait of 300 or so saints, predominantly male, who happened to be born or lived on the island throughout the centuries. Along with the saints' biographies, he also gave the names of Cypriot villages where the saints used to live. By doing so, Makarios was sacralizing the land and was creating a holy island, a topos of pilgrimage, filled with the relics of saints resting there. The island of Aphrodite, as he said in a speech he gave in the United States in 1958, the island of Aphrodite turned into the island of saints throughout the Byzantine and early Christian period. In his travels abroad, instead of promoting the Cypriot antiquities of the Hellenic culture that had been taken away to the Western museums, he spoke about the removal of saints' relics that had been taken away to Constantinople during the Arab raids, as well as about the manuscripts with the saints' biographies that were taken away to the libraries of the Vatican, Paris, Jerusalem, and Mount Athos. Himself a mystic, Makarios had to refuse his individuality, at least publicly. He had to efface his personal identity in order to become a saint himself. His life, however, still lives in the narratives of those who admired him as, quote, a legend, an idol, a descendant from the sky, a messiah, the one and only. These are just some of the characterizations that were given by several people who knew him. Because of Makarios' restless pursuit of eternity and spirituality, national fulfillment had resonance beyond the boundaries of the Cypriot nation. Makarios imagined himself to be bigger than a leader of a small island. Another set of his speeches abroad portray him like a world peacemaker. In a speech he gave at Columbia University in 1958, he said, "The ideas of peace and stability have all through the ages moved humanity in its philosophical contemplation and have inspired the great spiritual and political leaders of the world. It is only in these high ideals," he said, "that international stability and a happier future for the mankind lie." Ideas of the Cypriot national determination were portrayed as synecdoches of world peace and freedom for all nations fighting colonialism. The ramifications of Makarios' narratives and rhetoric continued long after his death. In countries such as Greece, Kenya, the Seychelles, and Cuba, his figure was portrayed on stamps and building structures, alluding to a broader reenactment of a Christian unity. Christian unity, as Makarios envisioned it, figures liberationist aspirations and ideologies in spaces remote to the Mediterranean. This reveals that the Mediterranean modern culture migrates in interesting ways to other spaces remote from it. Because of the accumulation of antitheses onto the narratives about Makarios' life, his figure helps us understand one very significant aspect in the study of the Mediterranean post-colonial culture, that the post-colonial Mediterranean is actually infused with or even haunted by the pre-colonial and pre-imperial past. In order to account for those infusions, I propose an autobiographical and aesthetic turn in the study of the Mediterranean that will allow us to continue to study Makarios and figures similar to him, not only in the framework of post-colonial politics or history, but also study these figures as Mediterranean cultural, poetic, and autobiographical phenomena. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Our second presenter today is Katherine Mann, who is an undergraduate pursuing a dual degree in French and in biopsychology, cognition, and neuroscience. And I understand that she has also recently added a minor in computer science. She was in Switzerland for her fellowship. She had a CES summer research and internship grant, that is from the Center for European Studies. The title of her talk is Prevalence and Factors Associated with Smoking in Young Swiss Men with ADHD. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cole, for that very warm welcome. And as he said, my name is Katherine Mann. I'm currently a senior at the University of Michigan. I do have a lot on my plate, but I love being back at this school. So I wanted to say that I actually spent the last semester abroad in the University of Lausanne, which is in Switzerland. I loved it so much that I didn't want to leave, and I decided to stay for the summer. But I think, as you all know, Switzerland is an incredibly expensive country, so I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own. So if it wasn't for the Center for European Studies, I wouldn't have been able to stay. So thank you very much. So the title of my study is The Prevalence and Factors Associated with Smoking in Young Swiss Men with ADHD. To give you guys some background, people with ADHD tend to have much higher rates of whether it be smoking, drinking, a lot of dangerous activities. The actual figure right now is people with ADHD suffer from about 2 times higher rates for smoking than people without ADHD. Now that is a lot higher. So this study goal was to measure the prevalence of smoking and the factors, and the particular study was for Swiss men with ADHD. The study actually the data came from a study that's already existing. It's a study called CSURF. It's a cohort study over a long period of time in which it's a study directed by 2 hospitals in Lausanne and Zurich. It was started in 2010. It's still going on today. Interesting enough, Switzerland actually still has mandatory conscription, so that's where this data came from. There were nearly 6,000 participants, which was quite a few. It was offered at an army base. It was completely voluntary and paid as well. Here are the stages of the study. There are 4. So there were actually 2 surveys sent out. There was one that was a baseline survey, and then 18 months later, in stage 4, as you can see, they sent out a second survey. In between those 2 stages, they had 2 others in which they just sent out contact information. And as you can see, those are the amounts that they received, and that's in Swiss francs, so that's a little more than the American dollar. So this was how I made the ADHD variable. One of the things that was on the study, I should mention, on the survey, there was a bunch of general information that was just about activities, daily activities, their lifestyle, including drinking, smoking, stuff like that. So they didn't actually have something that checked off, check here if you have ADHD or not. So what I had to do was to construct a variable. As you can see, this is what's called the adult ADHD self-report scale. This has been shown to be pretty accurate. It's only, it's 6 questions. It was placed on the survey, so the men didn't actually know that they were taking an adult self-report. They didn't know they were actually doing this, essentially. So these results are completely honest, completely unbiased. The way that this is measured is that the dark gray boxes, if they had checked more than 4 of those, the person most likely has ADHD and needs further testing. So for my data, I use this as someone who probably has ADHD. This was how I constructed the smoking variable. The question says, how often have you generally smoked cigarettes in the past 12 months? So there's choices like every day, 5 to 6 days a week, 3 to 4 days, different frequencies. For my variable, I considered a smoker as someone to be who smokes every day. Now here are the results. So this is kind of some just general data. On the left are all the factors that I looked at. So I looked at age, family income, education, cigarette smoking, binge drinking, and cannabis use. In the major columns, we have on the most left is ADHD negative, so someone without ADHD, ADHD positive, and the total in general. So out of the 6,000 participants, I used about 5,810. So that means I excluded about 100 because they had incomplete data, because the men were allowed to exclude answers if they wanted to. So as you can see, the mean age was about 20 because this is mandatory conscription. It was about the average age of the men. So that actually ended up affecting some of the other data. For example, education. Since they are 20, most of them haven't completed their upper or higher degrees yet. So as you can see, most of them completed their non-higher education track, but it's not representative of people who actually went to college or who didn't. For the family income is pretty evenly split, as you can see, between everyone. It's about 50-50. For cigarette smoking, that's when you see the biggest discrepancy. For people with ADHD, it was at 27.6%. For people without ADHD, it's only 20.9%. And just as a point for comparison, in the US, it's about 19% for adults. This also shows that for binge drinking, it shows actually that a lot of the population technically binge drinks once a month or more often. But please remember, these are 20-year-old men, so that makes sense. And a binge drink is considered drinking 6 or more units of alcohol on one occasion. And then the last was cannabis use. That also had a huge discrepancy, as you can see, that I highlighted in blue. For ADHD positive, it's 19.9%. For people without ADHD, it's only 9%, so that's huge. So just from there, I did some analysis in SPSS, the statistical software. What I used mainly was logistical regression because my variable was binary between do you have ADHD or not have ADHD. So on the first column, you can see that it's non-adjusted analysis, and the rightmost is adjusted analysis. What that means is for the non-adjusted, it was when I ran the tests just against ADHD and nothing else. When it was adjusted analysis, that means that it adjusted for all the other variables. So if we look at the numbers, it was very interesting to see that age, that didn't have any effect really. It's out to explain furthermore, this is odds ratios with a 95% confidence interval. So age didn't really have an effect because that's at 1. That means there's a pretty even chance between the two that it didn't have an effect. And then when you look at family income, that's also not much of an effect. Education, no. But you look at smoking. And for ADHD in the non-adjusted, you see that it is related because it's at 1.27 for a non-daily smoker and 1.58 for a daily smoker. So that shows essentially how to translate that is for someone, people with ADHD have a 1.27 higher chance of smoking than someone who doesn't smoke. And then for a daily smoker, it's 1.58 times. But the interesting thing was that after we actually added cannabis into the adjusted analysis, cigarette smoking was no longer significant. So what that kind of hinted to me was that the two variables are actually interacting. There's a confounding variable here. Binge drinking as well had the same effect in that it was for once a month or more often. It was significant and no longer became significant once cannabis use was added. Cannabis ended up being the only one that was still significant at the end with adjusted analysis. So this is to show that cannabis and smoking are highly, highly correlated. All the way, well, it's a bit hard to see, but under where it's blue in the exponent B, that's the odds ratio. So what that shows is someone, how did I do this? Yeah, so someone who's a daily smoker has a 20 times higher chance of being a cannabis smoker as well. So that's just showing that's highly correlated, and that makes sense because usually people who smoke will also smoke cannabis as well. So I guess, that was the last one. So I also would like to thank, even though they couldn't be here, obviously, my supervisor back in Switzerland. They were incredibly generous with giving me this opportunity. I'm currently in the works of still looking at the data because since my conclusions were confounded, I couldn't exactly write a paper on that yet, but I would like to be able to look at the data a little more, find some more information, and see if I can find what's really going on here. So I don't know this is actually where I lived by. Not trying to make you guys all jealous, but it was absolutely beautiful. But I know we're doing questions later, so no questions or comments, but here's the picture. So thank you very much.
I hope people will have questions later for people. I just thought it would be better to do them all at the end in order to use our time most efficiently. Our third presentation today is Alice Sullivan, who is a PhD candidate in the art history department here at the university. She received a CREES Research Internship and Fellowship Program grant. This is from the Center for Russian and Eastern European Studies. And she will tell us about her research adventures in Romania.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. The title of my dissertation, which I did not include on the slide, is The Painted Fortified Monastic Churches of Moldavia, Bastions of Orthodoxy in a Post-Byzantine World. This past summer, with grants from the CREES Research Internship and Fellowship Program, the Medieval and Early Modern Studies Program, and the John H. Darms Research Fellowship, Mentoring Fellowship, I was able to spend about 2 months in Romania conducting research towards my project. Having finished exams and defended my prospectus this past winter semester, the research that I undertook this summer helped me move forward with my project and into getting started to write my dissertation. So this view is from one of the monasteries that I study of the rolling hills of the Carpathian Mountains. So my research looks at the artistic production of the region of Moldavia in modern Romania, which is highlighted here on this map, in the context of intercultural contacts between the cultures of Western Europe and those of the Slavic Byzantine world, in the period beginning with the second half of the 15th century, so right after the collapse of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, and on through the early decades of the 17th century. This region of Moldavia at this time was really a frontier zone, in a way the last Christian frontier, or the first, we could say, in the face of the coming Ottomans. It was an Orthodox principality that had connections with the Byzantine world, the cultures of the Byzantine world, and also Western Europe. Stephen the Great, who I noted here on the slide, he was the ruler of the Prince of Moldavia from 1457 to 1504. He's one of my protagonists, and his son, his illegitimate son, Peter Rareș, ruled from 1527 to 1546 with a small break in between when he was excommunicated to Transylvania on the other side of the Carpathians. But it was during his reign that the church architecture in this region kind of came into being during Stephen's reign. In a letter that he wrote on January 25th, 1475, addressed to the rulers of Europe, asking for military and financial support towards his anti-Ottoman struggles, Stephen referred to his principality as the Gate of Christianity, which I think is something interesting to think about how he conceived of himself as a ruler and of his principality as this very porous frontier region. In this context, and beginning with Stephen's reign, there were a number of Orthodox churches and monasteries built in this region that took distinct architectural and iconographical forms. They gave way to a particular architectural type of church in the early decades of the 16th century that was perpetuated and slightly modified into the 17th century. This is just a sample of the buildings that I study. They vary in size. the church at Petrovice is quite small, while the church dedicated to St. Nicholas at Probota Monastery on the right is much larger. They also vary in function. Some are parish churches, others are monastic churches. And as you can see, they also differ in their extensive image cycles. Some are painted entirely on the interior and the exterior, while others are just painted on the inside. In this effect, the plan of these churches follows Byzantine church planning in terms of their layout, but it's adapted to the local needs and concerns of the Moldavians in that the church is elongated towards the west end with the addition of a burial chamber and a pronaos, and then an open extranarthex, as you can see here in the church at Humor Monastery. But in terms of their architectural features, they also adopt forms from Gothic architecture, such as the large buttresses against the walls, and also some of the window and door framings and some of the window tracery that models Gothic flamboyant examples. So in effect, these monuments really present an interesting synthesis of Eastern and Western-inspired aesthetic and symbolic conventions. And during the reign of Peter Rares, which was Stephen's illegitimate son, these churches received extensive painting cycles on the exterior as well. So just a few details of the church in Moldovica, which is here on the lower right. Around the eastern apse, the iconographical program of the exterior is pretty consistent. Around the eastern apse, we have mostly full-length representations of saints, apostles, angels, prophets, and then on the facades, on the southern, northern, and eastern and western facade, we have religious narrative scenes. The Akatistos hymn represented the Tree of Jesse, the Last Judgment, scenes from the creation of the world, and intermingled with these religious scenes, we have historical events such as the Siege of Constantinople, which appears here. This is painted on 7 churches, monastic churches from this region. And in one instance, it is identified as the Siege of 626 by the Avars and the Persians that was kind of, you could say, foiled with the help of a miracle-working icon of the Virgin Mary. And in the case of when the scene was painted on the Moldavian monasteries, the enemy figures were now rendered in the guise of the Avars or the Persians, but in the guise of the Ottoman Turks, because they were a threat at the time. So these images are adapted to reflect local concerns at the time. The interiors are also extensively painted. Here we're in the pronaos, or the first room in the church at Moldovica. And it's painted with a scene of the Orthodox calendar year, so from the lives of saints, and then scenes from the life of Christ appear in the naos, where the liturgical ceremonies take place. There's also a votive painting that is painted along the religious scenes in all of these buildings. And here, because the church in Moldovica was commissioned by Peter Rares, we have an image of Peter with his family members presenting a model of the church to Christ. And since the church is dedicated to the Annunciation of the Virgin, the Virgin functions as an intercessor in this exchange. Just a few more pictures of the interior. These churches, these monastic churches are fortified, which is an interesting thing to note about them. They're located in these remote areas, and they have these very large fortification walls around the monastic complex. The church is often, most often found at the very center, with the ancillary buildings around the fortification walls. And here I just brought 2 examples from the later part of the 16th century and into the 17th century. Because of the sheer number of monasteries in this region of Moldavia, modern scholars have dubbed it as a second Mount Athos, Mount Athos being the oldest still extant Orthodox monastic community. I don't know to what extent in the 16th century, or in the 15th and 16th century, there was an aim to reproduce the sacred topography of Byzantium or of Mount Athos in this region, or whether or not this is just the result of many building campaigns. So this summer I spent about 2 months in Romania visiting about 54 churches and monasteries, 50 of which will become part of the catalog that will accompany my dissertation. Also local museums, art and ethnographic museums, and archives in the cities of Bucharest, Iași. I also wanted to go to the archive in Suceava, and they knew I was coming, and they decided to close the day I got there for 2 weeks to go on vacation. So I will have to return to that archive in the near future. But my first stop was in Timișoara, where I spent time with a priest from the Orthodox Metropolitan Cathedral, which you see a picture of here on the screen, working on Old Church Slavonic. I do not have formal training in this language, but most of the documents that I work on are written in Old Church Slavonic. So I worked with him on translations, transcriptions, grammatical rules, and so forth, which was helpful prior to going to the archives. Then I traveled to Bucharest, where I spent time at the local archive there, mostly photographing documents and bringing them back to work on them while I'm back in Michigan. And I also went to the National Art Museum in Bucharest that has quite a lot of objects that once belonged to the churches and monasteries that I study from Moldavia. And I was able to get good quality photographs of these objects that I could work from now on. I encountered them at various moments in my studies in poor reproductions in books, so it's nice to actually have them in color and on a large scale. I then traveled to Iași, one of the major cities in the region of Moldavia. I spent time at the archive in Iași and also visited a few sites around the city. The Church of the Three Hierarchs is one of these churches. As you can see, it was built by Vasile Lupu, who was the Prince of Moldavia in the second half of the 17th century. And it follows architecturally the churches that were built in the first part of the 16th century in this region, but instead of figural painted decorations on the exterior, we have ornamental, geometric, and vegetal carvings. So it's a similar idea, just in a different form. In the summer of 2012, when I visited the city, the entire church was covered in scaffolding. So I was very, very pleasantly surprised to find the restorations complete this time around. Golia Monastery and Cetățuia are also two of the later monuments in my chronology. Both of these were originally built on the periphery of the city of Iași, but now they're kind of in the center, in the central region. And I particularly like this picture of Golia Monastery taken from the tower, the entrance tower, that shows the church surrounded by this forest of apartment buildings from the communist era. So this might serve as the cover for something that I work on in the future.
Great picture.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it really speaks to the history, visually, to the kind of turbulent history of this region. Then I rented a car and went in the countryside on some paved roads and some unpaved roads to visit the other churches through the rolling hills of the Carpathians in this region of Moldavia. And these are just a few examples of the other buildings, the other kinds of buildings that I visited. The Church at Humor models Moldovița. They were built around the same time. The church in Bălinești is not a princely commission. It was built by one of the chancellors of Stephen the Great. But it models architecturally in the interior the churches from this region. And then the Church of Sucevița Monastery, it was built by the Movila brothers. There are three brothers. And it's the last monument built in the tradition, and built and decorated in the tradition inaugurated by Stephen and Peter. So it's the last church that is entirely painted on the exterior. Putna Monastery is the burial site of Stephen the Great. The church underwent many restorations over time. It originally did not have as many buttresses on the exterior as you see here. Volovăț, the Church of Volovăț is a parish church that was built to commemorate a military victory. And the Church of Dragomirna is quite unique among the monuments in being the tallest and the most narrow out of all the churches. And in the tower at Dragomirna Monastery, we have the very first instance of ornamental, geometric and vegetal carvings that on the Church of the Three Hierarchs, it takes up the entire exterior of the church. I also made a few friends along the way. I spoke with monks and priests and nuns at various monasteries, and curators at at local museums. These are two priests from Teslo Monastery. At Bistrica Monastery, the picture in the middle, I was inappropriately dressed to walk into the monastic compound because I was wearing pants as opposed to a long skirt or a dress. So a monk ran to his room and brought out this robe for me to put on, and then he took me around and talked to me. And then at Sucevica Monastery, the nuns were tremendously helpful, and they even invited me to have lunch with them. So this is their dining room, their more formal dining room. They don't have all of their meals there, but I guess when special guests come around, they do. So that was a very nice experience as well. So now that I'm back in Michigan, for the past 2 months, I've worked on the catalog for my dissertation, and also I'm hoping this semester to start drafting the first chapter that deals with the architectural developments in church architecture in this region, and also highlighting the issues that the rest of my project will deal with, the rest of the chapters. Thank you.
Before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to comment on one thing, which is this is a very rare kind of exercise where you bring people in together whose work is not necessarily closely related. And I have to say that I am inspired and charmed by the experience because it gives you an incredible glimpse into the remarkable work that is going on at all different corners of the university. And so I want to say how grateful I am to the presenters for preparing such nice presentations here, even though it's a rather unusual exercise. Our last speaker today is Anastasia Tkach, who is an undergraduate studying for her BA in Russian and Eastern European Studies and in Political Science. She's also in the honors program, and she is a Ukrainian Studies minor. She received last year a Center for Russian and Eastern European Studies Research Internship and Fellowship Program grant, and she will give her American view into the Ukrainian parliament. Thank you, Anastasia.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you again, CREES, for the program grant. I, unlike the other presenters, had an internship. I wasn't doing research, so I had a 7-week internship in the Ukrainian parliament, which is also known as the Verkhovna Rada in Ukrainian. So the internship was organized through the League of Interns, or Liha Interniv, which you can see at the logo at the top, which is a Ukrainian NGO, and also works in conjunction with the Parliamentary Development Project, which is sponsored by USAID. And these organizations together normally host Ukrainian interns from all around Ukraine for 8 months, which you can see that group there. However, this year, for the first time, the League of Interns decided to open a 2-month program to foreign students. So this year, they accepted 2 American interns, which was me and a student from The Ohio State University, Seamus Kelleher, who's featured there. This was one of our first days in the parliament. And we became the first American interns to intern in the Ukrainian parliament. And because of this position, we were often called the pioneers or pionere of this foreign intern program. And there you can see the Ukrainian parliament in session. So we had internships in 2 parliamentary committees. The League of Interns focuses on internships in committees where rather than with members of parliament, so that we work in a nonpartisan environment, and also we can see where the work of the parliament is really done. So our first internship was in the Interparliamentary Committee, and here we did a research project focusing on Ukrainian relations with North and South America, and we were looking at sort of diaspora communities in these separate countries and how they were able to sort of improve their nation's respective relations with Ukraine. And this was important to both of us as we both came from diaspora families, and it was a really interesting project. So we talked to the head of that committee after our first 3 weeks, and we sort of discussed what we came up with. And then we moved to the European Integration Committee for our final 4 weeks of the internship. In this committee, we were able to sit in on committee meetings between members of parliament as they discussed changes in laws that were needed to align Ukraine with European standards. And this is one of those such meetings. Here is Tarasuk, and that's Nemeria, and that's Poroshenko. And then to the far right is a representative of the EU, what's his name, Shriver. and then there's me in the back and Seamus as well. So we were able to sit in these really important meetings where they were discussing all of these issues with Ukrainian law, and you really got to see what's on the forefront of Ukrainian issues with Europe. And I don't know if you guys saw former President Yushchenko last week, but Ukrainian integration into Europe is a really big question right now. So this was a really awesome opportunity. And then, so the League of Interns required us to do a final project for our internship before we received our certificates of completion. So in light of different protests and rallies that I saw throughout the summer, I decided to do my final project on laws of freedom of peaceful assembly in Ukraine, or the lack of laws of peaceful assembly, really. So at the end of my 7 weeks, I gave a formal presentation in the Ukrainian language on this topic. So in addition to our formal internship aspects, the League of Interns also allowed us to travel and had a cultural program for us. And travel is really important in a country like Ukraine, where regional histories are very different, and you can also see sort of the language boundaries in the country. So our internship was centered in Kyiv, and in Kyiv, most of the people I met were very bilingual, and they could easily switch between Russian and Ukrainian. So, for example, all of the official government documents have to be in Ukrainian, but within the committees, many of the committee members would be speaking Russian amongst themselves. So it was very bilingual. But then, like, our first trip was to the Crimean Peninsula, which is down here. We went to Simferopol and then to Sudak on the coast. And here, they predominantly speak Russian and then also Tatar. So in Simferopol, we were able to see the Crimean Parliament and sort of what goes on there, and that was a really interesting experience. And we got to talk to Ukrainian interns who are interning in that parliament. And then we got to, like, hang out on the Black Sea, which was also cool. And then next we went to Lviv, which is in the west, and they only speak Ukrainian there. And we were hosted by the Ukrainian Catholic University, and which I studied in last summer. So that was awesome to see all of my program managers and tutors again. And we were given tours around the city, and we also got to listen to lectures with other foreign students that were visiting the university at the same time. And then our last trip was to Slavutic, which is north of Kyiv. So we went pretty much all around except to the east, which we would have gone to if we had more time. We kind of wanted to go to Kharkiv. But Slavutic is a city built just outside the 30-kilometer radius of the nuclear disaster of Chernobyl, and it was built in 1986 to house all of the people from the different republics of the USSR in order to clean up the disaster. So that was a really interesting city, and to sort of see the history there. So this is, to the bottom right is Slavutic. You can see the big apartment complexes that were built to house all these people. And then above that is Sudak on the Black Sea. And Sudak is really interesting because you have these mountains, but you also are on the coast. So that was us climbing down from a mountain. And then that is us in Lviv with Seamus, my former tutor, sporting a Michigan t-shirt, and myself on our last day. So in addition to language divisions of politics, I was also able to explore other social aspects of Ukrainian culture while I was there. The program manager of League of Interns, who I actually lived with, is also a professor at Kyiv Mohyla Academy, which is one of the top universities in Ukraine. So I was able to attend, she was teaching a class on human rights at the time, and she let me attend one of her lectures and actually give a presentation on gay rights in the United States, and I got to have a conversation with law students there about how they saw the gay rights situation in Ukraine, and that was really interesting. I also went to their college beauty pageant, which was also a cultural experience, all of these college students. And then at the end of the summer, I attended their law student graduation ceremony, which was also interesting. And then through the Parliamentary Development Project, we got to attend Ukrainian language classes with Ukrainians, and then also English discussion groups with Ukrainians that were working on their English. And we got to discuss topics such as citizenship in Ukraine, and then like parliamentary protest and sort of the path that parliamentarians are taking right now. So those were all really interesting cultural experiences. So altogether, this internship enabled me to meet many interesting people and to discuss and see Ukrainian politics in a much more transparent fashion. I do a lot of research on Ukrainian politics, but it's nothing compared to actually being there and discussing it with people who are working with the government or have worked or just seeing the process and experiencing it firsthand. So it was a really awesome opportunity, and I'm very thankful for the program funding. But thank you.